Okay so far? All right. Next is meaningful learning. Meaningful learning is where when you learn something new, it must be related to what you already know, or we call this a prior knowledge. Okay. So, how meaningful is the learning? All right. You do not make your students memorize things. So that is called rote learning, memorizing. But you allow them to use the language in a meaningful way. So you teach them, for example, you teach them grammar rules. Um, do you think the student can just pick up from there and use the language by just knowing the grammar rules?
No.
Okay, so how do we make that meaningful? Any suggestions?
Perhaps set an example for them. Or
Like?
Role play, I guess.
yes.
Practicing the language.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. Right, so you have a role play and then you ask them to use the language. So for example, you teach them simple present tense, all right, and present continuous tense. So you ask them to a role play, or maybe come up with a dialogue, a conversation between two people, asking what they are doing at that moment. Okay, so then the usage of the simple present and the present continuous will be there. For example, where are you going to? Where are you going? And then the person says, I'm going to the library. All right. So this kind of situation, or the context you give, students will now have to use the language that they have learned. They have learned those grammar rules about present continuous and the simple present. So that is what they will use in that activity. So when you get them to ask questions and all that, this is what we do in everyday life, right? Okay, so when you do this on in a daily basis, and you teach the students and you tell them how it is used in real life, then they will pay more attention. All right, and usually learning is like a building block. So you start with something like a foundation, and then you build on that foundation. So that is what the prior knowledge is all about. It's your previous knowledge, and you build the new knowledge on it. So you tell the students, okay, last week we learned about present continuous tense. Remember, we did that role play, the dialogue. Okay, today we're going to talk about something that has already happened. So it's going to be about the past. Okay, so students will now try to relate to what they have already learned, and then they will look at how different it is from what they are learning today. So when they make those connections, it becomes meaningful. All right. So every time we plan a lesson, it's important to think about what are the prior knowledge students should have to be able to do this particular lesson today. So if we are giving them a role play, have they done it before? If they've never done role play before, then you probably have to explain what is role play and how to go about it. All right. If they have done this before, then you don't need to explain that. You just say, okay, now we're going to do role play, like you're going to come up and you're going to talk to each other or something like that. You know, something simplified because they already know how to. And then you tell them about the content and build it on something they already know. So when you make that connection, it's actually connecting things in your brain. You can't see it, but it's like, like a mind map where you have like one bubble connected to another. All right. So that connection is that previous, relating to previous knowledge. So the students who actually follow through your lesson very closely, they are able to relate very quickly, because when you tell them something, they can actually connect. All right. Students who don't pay attention are the ones who cannot connect, because they lost that essence of what you taught them in the previous class, or maybe today's class they are not paying attention, so they cannot relate. All right. And in such instances, especially if you have many students who cannot relate because they did not pay attention, then you end up repeating what you had said in the earlier class. But that is only to make it more meaningful, because they lost that part due to them not concentrating. So you need to help them make that connection. Remember, your students are going to be young learners. They may be teenagers, but they are still young learners. All right. So concentration may not be their priority in your class. All right. Concentration on other aspects would be greater. Okay. So how we make it meaningful is actually in the hands of the teacher, to make sure that the students can relate to what you're saying. Right. Okay. The third is anticipation of reward. So this is like, you do something and you expect something. So when you have that expectation, then the effort is greater. Okay. However, we know that, it's the process that counts. It's not really the end product. Okay. But again, they are young learners, so rewards are actually important. For older students like you, what would be rewards? Do you expect a candy or something at this stage?
A good night's sleep.
Okay, so which means less homework. All right. And rewards at this age will probably be like being getting good grades and being in the dean's list. All right. So if you have consistently gotten that uh, mark and you've been on the list, so that would be a reward. So you would perform so that you get that reward at the end. The rewards are usually intrinsic, it's not extrinsic. Do you know the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic?
No.
Are you learning psychology?
We
Yeah,
are. We will.
but not yet. Yeah,
We are. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So, not this semester?
this semester.
Or this semester? This semester. Okay. So you will learn about motivation and intrinsic and extrinsic. Okay, let me just let it out first. So extrinsic motivation is like a reward that you can see. For example, like the teacher puts the candy bars on the table and says, all right, if you do your work fast, you get one candy. One candy bar. If you get the answer right, you will get something. So they get excited, all right, and they work towards that reward. So that is an extrinsic. That means it's external, all right. Internal, which is intrinsic reward or motivation, is actually that comes inside you, all right. You get that self-satisfaction. You get good grades, you get self-satisfaction. So that satisfaction is not seen outside, but you can feel it. All right. So the anticipation of rewards would differ from age groups, from subjects also. Certain subjects, you expect something different than other subjects. So this is what is called intrinsic, which is internal reward. and extrinsic would be external reward. All right, and it deals with motivation. All right, so the mindset of the student is that if I'm going to get that, if I want to get that reward, I have to work towards it. So they would actually work towards it. So how do you encourage the teacher's role here is to give verbal praises, encouragements, compliments, all right? And then to also tell them or remind them that not to expect something, in that short term, but something in long term. Like what you learn today may be just a small portion, but when you accumulate everything at the end of Form 5 when you leave school, you would find that, you have so much of knowledge of the language. You can use the language well. So you give them that kind of boost, that kind of motivation, and that enthusiasm builds on. Right? So when you tell them what is in store at the end of the day, they kind of work towards that. Right? Can be intrinsic, can be extrinsic. So like tangible, intangible, those are the words that you would use in language, but the actual psychological term would be extrinsic and intrinsic rewards. All right.